is in such good shape, Brian, that nobody's going to even bother to show up or worry about it, which is quite a credit to. Yeah, which is quite a credit to you and your boss, Governor Pence, I guess. Let's hope that's what this all means.
We'll take that credit.
Okay. This is being webcast, and I'm Senator Luke Kenley, chairing the Budget Committee this year, and paving the way for Chairman Brown to take over next summer and for a couple of years. But that job normally rotates between the Senate and the House, and I just happen to be in the spot where we're serving. And we also have, among the members on the committee, we have Representative Tim Brown, who's the chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, to help run the meeting. And then we have a new alternate from the Republican caucus, Bob Cherry. And Bob, we're glad to have you and your wisdom from Hancock County with us today. And also, Senator Talion is not here today. I assume she'll be here soon. But we have a new alternate who is actually an experienced either alternate or member. He's a pinch hitter of all sorts, and that's John Broden from South Bend. And John, we're glad to have you back for these deliberations. And I have to tell you, John, I'm listening to this book that George W. Bush has written about his father, and I'm listening to it on tape, and so he reads the book himself. And he's talking about how his father ran in 1964 to be a U.S. Senator from Texas, which would be the first ever Republican U.S. Senator from Texas, and he lost. But he didn't feel too badly because in the state Senate, out of 39 members, they had no Republicans. And in the state House, they had 148 Democrats and 2 Republicans. So that was a pretty small caucus room, I think. But anyhow, we're glad to have you with us, John. And Eric assures me that the House folks, hopefully somebody will get here. And we have a fairly extensive set of hearings set up over several weeks here. And I have a note here that says Representative Clinker will be here shortly. So Representative Clinker from Lafayette will be here shortly. But the first item of business that we have today is I asked Brian Bailey, who's the budget director and a member of the State Budget Committee, to he and his staff have had to prepare a lot of documents for us as to how what we'll have to look at during these budget hearings as we go from week to week. And I asked Brian to kind of give us an opening statement or maybe some kind of a presentation about what the thoughts are as he and Governor Pence and Chris Atkins, who's the head of OMB, plan to present their budget to us for introduction in next year's legislative session. So, Brian, let me turn the floor over to you, and you're welcome to speak right where you are there, if you wish. And so we're interested to hear what you have to tell us.
I think this morning it would be helpful to do an overview of the schedule over the next 4 weeks for Budget Committee. And I see this work as work of 3 milestones, and the first milestone we're hitting today, which is 4 weeks of hearings each Wednesday and Thursday between now and December 18th, excepting the week of Thanksgiving. So we won't be here next week. We will be here tomorrow, and then the week following Thanksgiving we'll be here every Wednesday and Thursday through December 18th. Each member of Budget Committee was given an opportunity to request agencies that they wanted to present before the committee. We have taken all of those requests from both caucuses, both houses of the General Assembly, and all of those agencies appear on this schedule here before you today. There will be a slight change, and it's also posted on the internet. Thank you, Zach. There will be a change for the Secretary of State. They've requested to move their time. I think we've already set that. I think there's also a request to move the meeting time for Department of Homeland Security, so we're going to work to accommodate that. But other than those 2 exceptions, the schedule before you is the final and most up-to-date schedule.
Brian, I might, let me interrupt you at that point. Before we came over, I discussed with David Reynolds, who had helped you put the schedule together, on the December the 4th, they're having the legislative conference over, I don't know if it's the convention center, I assume it is. And Dr. Brown and I assume members of the other two caucuses have been asked to serve to speak on a fiscal committee there at 1 o'clock. So I'm asking David to try to work that around. And then we looked at the schedule a little bit more throughout the whole thing to see what we could get in there. And a couple observations on my part that I think are just works in progress. I'm not sure if all the universities really want 45 minutes apiece. I'm not sure I want them to have 45 minutes, but anyhow, we're going to take a look at that. But I also am a little concerned about, as you know, we visited 2 Excel centers this year, and the governor had, in his last budget, that was an agenda item that he wanted us to help fund those, and we did do that, and I think they're actually being very successful. And so the issue with them is whether or not we can afford to expand their program, and if so, how we do it. And I kind of think we ought to fit them in the budget committee hearings somewhere. So I'll ask you and David to kind of keep working on that,
Sure.
on the schedule as we go forward, if you would.
Sure, happy to do that.
Okay, sorry to interrupt you there.
So thematically, the agencies that are scheduled to appear before Budget Committee in the next 4 or 5 weeks, you have the larger executive branch agencies, DOC, NDOT, DCS, FSSA, IDEM, State Police, DNR, and then you have health and public safety agencies that would include Homeland Security, Department of Toxicology, Department of Health. We have economic development agencies, so that's IEDC, DWD, and the Biosciences Research Institute. K-12 education, DOE, and the Center for Education and Career Innovation will appear before the Budget Committee. Tomorrow, we'll have the enterprise-wide state agencies responsible for tax and fiscal matters, so that will be the OMB umbrella agencies, including DOR, and then also IDOA. The members have requested to hear from certain separately elected officials as well as the judicial branch. So you'll see them on the schedule as well. The separately electeds are the Secretary of State and the Attorney General. Tax Court, obviously separate branch, and then Supreme Court. Quasi-agencies not already mentioned, NPERS and IFA. IFA will be part of the OMB umbrella agency presentation tomorrow doing the debt overview. And then the public university portion of the presentation for Budget Committee, there's going to be on December 10th a CHE preview of their requests and instructions to the universities, followed by university presentations on December 10th and 11th, barring any shortening of the schedule, and then the final CHE recommendations on December 18th that will coincide with the Medicaid forecast and the revenue forecast. So I see all of that as the first milestone of Budget Committee hearings, and I'll pause here before I go on to the next milestone for any questions.
Help me refresh my memory. You probably have already had your agencies working for some period of time on their budget requests, I assume, and I hope you'll take this time to maybe go through some of the ideas or the methodology that you're using and some of the practices that you're planning to implement in the budget. But once we get the revenue forecast, then you all will prepare kind of a final budget for presentation to this committee. Is that correct?
That's correct, Senator.
And then we have some deadlines, I think, in January where we have to consider your request and then send it on to the House. Isn't that right?
Yeah, I think there's language in the statute about presentation of the budget report and budget bill to Budget Committee. By statute, that has to take place before the second Monday in a year that doesn't follow a gubernatorial election. So for us, that would have to be before Monday, January 12th,
Okay.
2015. So before means it can't be on that day, I think legally. So it would be that prior week.
And since we're going to come into session on the 6th, we probably need to schedule that hearing that week, I would assume. And since there won't be a lot of bills moving, hopefully we could do it although the 6th is Tuesday, we could finish it by Thursday rather than come in on Friday for that, maybe. All right. Good. David, is there anything else on, have you thought that through on that stuff, on them? All right, okay, good.
Okay.
All right,
Regarding base budget instructions, we have requested that agencies apply a 3% reduction to their base, executive branch agencies, 3% reduction to their base. So when you see executive branch agencies before you, the base is going to be 3% less than the fiscal 15 appropriation. By and large, the separately elected branches, or separately elected officials and the separate branches of government are using the fiscal 15 appropriation as the base. One more note on the 27th pay. I don't know if you're aware of this, but about every 11 to 12 years, there's a 27th pay in a fiscal year. That's going to take place in fiscal 16.
Okay.
So as you're looking at the O1A reports in particular, you'll notice that the fiscal 16 budget will be, that number will be slightly above the base, and it'll be slightly above fiscal 17, and for the most part, that's because of that 27th pay that's going to take place. Our estimates are that that amounts to about $42 million for that 27th pay for state government, and that's payroll A agencies only. So you'll see payroll B agencies before you. I think DCS is an example of that. They're payroll B, and so fiscal 16 and fiscal 17 are going to match up with the baseline. And then any increases to programmatic spending are going to be part of a change package.
when you apply, when you've asked them to plan with a 3% reduction from their 2015 appropriations, you're talking, just to clarify, you're talking about the number that the legislature actually appropriated at that time, not a number that you had already, because you had to do some holdbacks during this cycle. So which number are we working off of?
Thank you for clarifying that. That's the 3% reduction from the General Assembly's appropriation.
Okay. And what is your thinking on why you're doing that? Does that have to do with the fact that revenues have been slow to come during this biennium and you don't anticipate a change, or is there some other strategy that's driving that decision?
I think it's a combination of looking for increased efficiencies, particularly in executive branch agencies. In the first executive order that the governor signed upon taking office was the program assessment comprehensive evaluation of all of the state agencies, executive branch agencies, looking for increased efficiencies, looking for ways to harness NPH and performance technology to drive even greater efficiencies in our agencies. There's also a thought toward revenue performance over fiscal 14 and what we've seen in fiscal 15 so far. So all of that's entering into the picture as far as the base instruction.
You've rolled out a new program that's kind of a management tool, what you call the MPH. And do you think that you're going to be, is that a robust enough system that you're actually, you think you're going to be able to make measurements and that would help you sort out your priorities so that you can achieve those goals on that 3% cut? Tell me how that works a little bit. You invited us all to come look at your model. I think Dr. Brown got a chance to see it, but I haven't looked at it. I wasn't able to do it at that time. So help me understand how that works a little bit there.
MPH is being used for bigger questions, bigger topics right now. One of the key ones that we're researching through MPH is reducing infant mortality, looking at collecting data that we already have within state government and trying to find ways, commonalities, causes of infant mortality. So that's an example of harnessing the technology to address a problem that we know is out there and are trying to find solutions to that. The GFP team, the Government Efficiency Financial Planning team, it's a division within OMB, is conducting the PACE review. They're looking at all programs across state government and making a list of programs that aren't performing as they should, are duplicative of other programs and spending that's taking place in other agencies, and just looking for efficiencies, looking for ways to consolidate programs, and in some cases look for ways to free up dollars that are being spent on underperforming programs or lower priority programs within the agencies themselves, and then reallocate those dollars through the budget process to new programs, or funneling them to programs that are successful and performing at high levels. We've asked the agencies, as part of their budget submissions, to give us an evaluation of their own programs and rank them
Okay.
in order of priority. So we are taking their input as well as we go through this evaluation process.
Well, that's a big task, but obviously it's one that when you're running a $15 billion budget, you have to constantly look for ways to try to do those kind of things. When you come back in January, one of the relationship things that we have here in Indiana with respect to the statutory authority that the legislature appropriates, and the executive branch then does the management and the expenditure. And so one of the sort of the tension between the separation of powers is that when the legislature appropriates, the assumption is that whatever money we have in certain locations is going for those programs. Indiana kind of has had a history, and in particular the last 6 or 7 years when we've been in a recession, it's been pretty important for the executive branch and the governor to have the flexibility to, number one, be able to make reductions in expenditures without, for example, having statutory language that says you cannot spend less than this. Mm-hmm. We've never really done that. And I know that other states do that, and that creates some pretty significant problems in terms of management. But the other part of that is that over time, you've had some latitude to move money back, and then you have to run it through what committee is that you run it through, and then it can be used for another purpose. We've done some of that during your administration, and I think we did some in the previous administration. And the question then arises, so when Dr. Brown and I present on the floor of the House or the Senate a budget, and we say this is what we're putting the money in here for, everybody's voting on it being used in that way with a fairly highly level of reliability, but we've had to be we've seen some instances where we've had some fairly major changes of direction of the use of funds, depending on whose eyes are looking at it, maybe for the better or for the worse. And so
yeah, I'd like more detail on that as far as the Pence administration is concerned. I've attended the Board of Finance meetings. That's the board that comprises the auditor, treasurer.
Board of Finance, right, that's right.
And I've not seen much more than just routine
Okay.
transactions.
Yeah.
While I've been budget director.
Well, I think that's just something that I'm starting to feel a little bit, and we want to kind of, one of the purposes of these meetings is to give us a chance to try to talk to each other about how we put those things together for the benefit of your ability to manage, and also for the benefit of our ability to have a sense of confidence of, okay, our budget does mean something, in terms of what we're doing. And so that I'm just bringing that up at this point because I think it's an item that we need to continue to think about as it works into that mix.
Sure. And I can say that our objective is to execute the budget that the General Assembly passes.
Right.
We're the executive branch. That's our job. But for revenue underperformance in fiscal 14 and fiscal 15, we wouldn't have had to have taken at least as serious
Sure.
actions as we had. And with fiscal 14, the budget was based on a revenue forecast that was, we didn't realize $168 million that had been part of the forecast, so we had to make course corrections because of that. In fiscal 15 so far, at least as compared to the monthly estimates, we're 85 million under the budget plan
Right.
that the budget was based on with the April 2013 forecast, making adjustments for any legislative changes that
Right.
had finally passed.
Which requires quite a bit of work on your part and flexibility. And I feel like you've done a good job of managing bottom line type numbers on our budget. So the purpose of the conversation is not to criticize or question those things, but merely to point out that this is part of the dynamic. One of the things that you had to do last year, and we had put, I think, was it $89 million in contingent funds for employee pay raises, and the administration chose to do some bonuses, but they did not give a general pay raise. Are you looking at that issue as you prepare this next budget to see what you think you might want to do in terms of general pay raises and things like that?
Absolutely. That's something that we're taking a close look at right now, and of course it's contingent on the revenue forecast. This is, I was going to get to the second milestone. I wanted to talk about the revenue forecast. So December 18th, we'll have a revenue forecast, we'll have a Medicaid forecast, and that is the work of fiscal analysts from both caucuses, from both houses of the General Assembly, plus a member from the executive branch. And that's the consensus revenue forecast that we'll be using to build our budget on, the governor's submitted budget. And whatever that revision is for fiscal 15 is going to be pretty significant in any decisions that we make, as well as what the 16 and 17 forecasts are.
Well, I've interrupted you here. Go ahead.
Sure.
I'm sorry.
That's the second milestone of the process. That really closes, that bookends the budget committee hearings. I think we're going to have a business meeting that day as well for a few cleanup projects and review items. The third milestone that we touched upon.
Is that the December the 17th? We're going to do that. Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
All right.
So that will close our business for this year as far as budget committee is concerned, that December 18th meeting. The third milestone is the preparation of the budget report and the budget bill for the governor for submission to budget committee. And as we talked earlier, we think it's probably going to have to be the week before Monday, January 12th. So we just need to lock down what that day is going to be, and we'll make sure that everything's ready for that day. And then what the budget committee approves or reviews will then be the budget that will be presented to House Ways and Means, and then it will be in Dr. Brown's shop at that point.
Good.
And then finally, there's also, I know we don't want to think about it right now, but there's going to be an April forecast, and we just need to keep in mind that to some extent we're going to have this process compressed again come April once that forecast comes out, and we'll know finally the revenue and the resources that will be available to fund the budget. And then finally, one word of thanks to Deputy Budget Directors Zach Jackson and Deanna Oware, the Assistant Directors for Budget Agency, and the budget analysts that work for us. They've done all the heavy lifting the past few weeks and months to get us where we are today in terms of agencies ready to testify before you, documents, submissions, and numbers. So I just want to give them a note of thanks as we begin.
It's a lot of work, and it's an enormous job, and people that don't get exposed to it all the time have no idea how much it is. So we really appreciate everything that you and all of your staff and the assistants are doing. I might note, and I don't know, I think this would work, but Budget Committee's traveled quite a bit this year, and it takes a lot of work just to go on the trips and plan all those things out. And we've kind of become a working group, and so I wanted to get on everybody's calendar for really, as opposed to here. You don't think that'll work?
Well, we have,
The last day, you're talking about being done at noon. Okay. Well, either December 17th or December 18th, I want to try to bring a little smile back to everybody's face after we do all these gruesome budget deliberations. So I want to invite everybody. We're going to throw a Christmas party somewhere. It will be during that lunch on December 17th or 18th, whatever works out best for everybody. And we want to make sure that everybody puts that on their schedule so that we can talk about this and enjoy ourselves at that point in time. So, questions for, yes, Dr. Brown.
Thank you, Senator Kenley, and thank you for the opportunity, and thank you, Brian, for your hard work and the team here and everybody's caucus input. I think it's an integral part of all this. Do you, as we have presentations, are we going to have potential issues related to federal legislation that may change our outlook? Is that part of your budgeting process? Potential block granting of different federal programs because of congressional action. Do you think that plays an integral part in this?
I think it plays a part, and we're always looking for ways where we can fund programs with federal resources where it's appropriate and where it's lawful to do so. I don't foresee or anticipate any major issue or question mark with regard to federal funding at this point.
Okay.
In the preparation process.
In your performance hub, you've talked about both big picture items, and I know that infant mortality is on the kind of radar as a big picture item to try and look at that. But you also talked about some performance models and things like that. Do you look at part of the performance model, I guess, for lack of a better phrase, customer satisfaction? Does our consumer, the taxpayer, and the person receiving service, is that part of an integral part of this evaluation?
Absolutely. Where there's interface directly with the public and we have customers, clients of different agencies, that is a very strong component of overall performance assessment and management. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Broden, do you have any questions for Brian or anything you want to bring up at this point? I know you're new to the process, but when we started this, we tried to solicit everybody's input as to which items who we wanted to hear from. This is the length of time that we're having the presenters here. It's a sort of a hybrid process, a little bit of a management by exception, trying to pick places where we thought that there were issues of interest. So I don't know if there's anything that you'd like to raise or question about with Brian today in terms of planning for these next meetings.
Well, thank you for the invitation, Mr. Chairman. Actually, Brian's overview has been very helpful, and actually Susan was able to sort of brief me on some of the work that had gone on beforehand. Just for the chair and the other members, I do have some conflicts with some dates. I was able to clear quite a few dates, but some I had already scheduled some court obligations, so I'm going to be here as often as I can and very much looking forward to the more detailed presentations. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Cherry.
Again, thank you for the opportunity to be part of this, but I really don't have anything to add at this time. I do appreciate you playing a Christmas party.
Well, that's an important part of this process. We got to keep smiling too, you know. Okay. Anything else, Brian, before we go ahead and dig in, start?
No, Mr. Chairman, that wraps it up for me.
Yeah. You know, one of the things, let's see, we do have, does Gaming Commission, we do have the agency operating account summary, which is somewhat of a developed standardized product. And taking the Gaming Commission, since they're going to do the first presentation, I wonder if you or Zach ought to just walk us through that last page where it says agency operating account summary. And,
Each agency that appears before Budget Committee will have a packet like this for each of the members, where there will be a presentation if the agency chooses to compose a presentation for presentation to Budget Committee. There's also a transmittal letter that is part of the agency's budget submission to Budget Agency, and then the O1A budget report is the report on, gives you basically actuals for 13, submitted actuals for fiscal 14 in terms of amounts, expenditures, the appropriation for 15, submitted baseline budget, that was the, we discussed that earlier, and then the submitted budget for fiscal 16, and if it's a payroll A agency and it's operating expenditure, you're going to see that 27th pay included as part of that submitted budget for fiscal 16, and then the fiscal 17 budget.
and then will we have in addition to the summary, will we have the detail made available on this in some way, shape, or form?
Senator, if I can, some of these are very lengthy. I mean, I'm assuming that like the FSSA report could very well be hundreds of pages.
Yeah.
If you want hard copies, I'm happy to bring them.
Right.
Or if it's helpful, we've created a website
Okay.
that has the schedule as well as the transmittal letter and the O1A report. We could also put the O1D report on there and save a tree if you want. But again, if you want hard copies
Okay.
of the O1D.
And then when you put that on your website, so that's available to the public as well?
to post those kind of the morning of the hearing
Okay,
for everyone to see.
okay.
Yeah, just let me know if you want hard copy or electronically
right.
available copies on those.
And as Budget Agency is working through and finalizing submissions for agencies, we are getting those transmittal letters, O1A reports to the fiscal analysts, making that available to them through Hyperion as well.
Well, even the summary, of course, raises, if you're not used to looking at these, raises some questions, because right on the very top left corner of the report, it says dedicated funds submitted actual for FY13 is 18 million, and then it drops to 3 million. So if you're not used to looking at that, probably people are going to want to know what that means to some extent. So oh, yeah. Well, let's go ahead and start with the Gaming Commission. And I think the presenter is Jennifer Reske, the Deputy Director. Is that right, Jennifer? Good. Well, you're first, so show us how to do this, okay?
I'm out of practice.
Yeah.
Executive Director Yelton asked me to convey his apologies for not being here today. As we speak, he's on his way to Southeast Indiana to tour the casinos with our commissioners in preparation for a meeting tomorrow in Lawrenceburg. It's been on his calendar for quite some time, and he was unable to resolve the scheduling conflict. We'd also like to thank Budget Director Bailey and his staff for their support and guidance in preparing our budget request this year. Our budget is prepared in accordance with OMB instructions and includes the 3% reduction. And I would like to start by working through the account summary. The Gaming Commission is a dedicated fund agency. We oversee Indiana's 13 casinos, 13,500 occupational licensees, 30 supplier licenses, and 3,500 organizations that are qualified to conduct charitable gaming. We do so with a staff of 40. We were able to achieve this 3% reduction mostly through cuts in this area. We do so by delaying filling vacant positions. We are also very selective in which positions we fill. We continue to offer also a voluntary unpaid leave program, which yields significant savings. Senator Kenley, you asked about the $18 million.
Right. help me understand the flow of the numbers here.
For many years, the Gaming Commission collected fines and fees which were retained in a fund. And at some point in, what was that, in 13, it was determined that it was time to use those funds for other purposes and move those out. That fund was swept. So our budget didn't change that year, but the
Okay.
number here reflects that the money, the 15 million was collected and swept from the account.
Where did the 15 million go?
Well, I think that's a question for budget staff. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I do recall that, and this was under the prior administration, I believe there was a Board of Finance transfer that moved this to, there's a fund underneath the budget agency called like Adjustments to Surplus. I think it got moved there and ended up reverting at the end of fiscal year 13.
Was that the year we did the automatic taxpayer refund?
No comment.
So trying to track it, half of it may have gone to the pension funds and half of it may have gone to the taxpayer as a part of the surplus that we did revert or that we did send back to the taxpayers. Could somebody just check and verify that for me so that I do know? 15 million may be a drop in the bucket to Budget Director Bailey, but it's not to me, so.
It's not to me.
Okay, thank you.
The second item you'll see would be gaming enforcement agent costs. Part of our enforcement efforts involve 150 law enforcement agents who are stationed at each casino, 10 each. These officers conduct regulatory investigations, but they also conduct criminal investigations. The cost of these agents is paid for 100% by the casinos where they are stationed. So the amount you see with the gaming enforcement agent is actually reimbursed 100% by the casinos. Many years ago, we were the recipient of charity gaming regulation. They transferred to our agency from Department of Revenue.
Thank you.
The agency, that part of our agency is funded primarily by license and renewal fees, as well as fines and forfeitures. This fund operates at a surplus as of today, and it also pays for our gaming control fund, our license control fund, and then also a transfer is made at the end of each biennium, or is it each year? Each year. I'm the substitute. The end of each year to the Build Indiana Fund. Gaming investigations. Our gaming investigations division conducted over 2,000 investigations over the last biennium. Anyone who is a key person at a casino or who has to work at a casino as part of their job is investigated. We do recover some of the costs through billing of those who are investigated through reimbursements. We also have the Athletic Commission with the Gaming Commission now, and they regulate boxing and mixed martial arts. The remainder you see, fingerprint fees, those are fees we pay to ISP for assisting us with our investigations. And then the Gaming Forfeiture Fund and the federal forfeiture, that represents what we've collected from our enforcement actions through the Gaming Control Division, and there are very specific rules on how those funds may be used. I'd be happy to answer any questions if you have them regarding our request.
We have some questions on this presentation. What's the on the gaming investigations? It does show a fairly large number on 13, then it goes down to 0 for 15. Are those funds that are collected from the entities, and then so was that a fund where the balance built up to, and so there was a question of whether we were sweeping or reverting some of those funds as we did in the other example, or is it something different?
I'm sorry, this is Kendra Nigg, by the way. She is our controller.
Okay, Kendra, you need to come to the microphone because we're on the web and they can't hear you.
I believe those 2 years, there was a change in the way that, we call that our feeder fund. 600,000 is is fed into the admin fund. And I believe those 2 fiscal years, there was a change in the way that transfer was handled, so it wasn't necessarily, it was, 600,000 was still fed into the admin fund from the gaming investigations, but it was handled differently and so it doesn't appear the way.
Now, I know that the gaming enforcement agent costs are recollected back from the casinos, the riverboats, and that group. What about the charity gaming enforcement? Do the people who participate in charity gaming actually pay for this enforcement, or does this come from somewhere else?
We collect fines and fees which cover the cost of that agency.
So the approximate $5 million that we see there would represent the fees and what few fines you do collect, and that's satisfactory to cover your enforcement costs for charity gaming? Would that be an accurate statement?
Today, it continues to cover the cost. There have been some changes in legislation in recent years which cause our funding to fluctuate. Now, for example, an organization can come in and reorganize and not pay a fee based on their prior income. You know, we have some organizations that bring in millions of dollars
Yes.
in charity gaming, but if they come in and reorganize, then they pay a flat fee. Is it $25? Of $25. So we've been able to work within those budget constraints to date, but if there were additional changes like that, we would probably have some difficulty meeting budget.
Was that a statutory change that occurred that allowed them to reorganize and avoid paying the fees?
I don't think the purpose was to allow them to avoid. I think there was another issue that the legislature wanted to address, and this was a byproduct of that.
Okay, so then the question for us would be, should we take a look at whether those fees should be paid by those folks, even though they're reorganizing or not? That's not really a question for you, it's sort of a question for us.
Public policy.
So maybe we need to make a note of that, David, and in the budget process, I don't know what the answer is. It may be that you shouldn't, but I think we need to take a look at that. Has your agency looked at that flow of funds or loss of funds there, Brian?
Revenue is on this.
Okay. You might want to take a look at that too and make a recommendation to us with respect to that. It's not a comment that's made from the perspective of let's go find money everywhere we can, but if people are going to engage in these type of activities and we do have to regulate them, I think the expectation has been that that's part of the cost of doing business for them, and so we ought to see whether or not that's being followed through. Okay, go ahead, Jennifer. Is there anything else?
I'm open to your questions if you have any regarding our request.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In in this packet that you gave us here, that just kind of shows us the industry on the wagering at the different locations and the volume. It does show on page 3 of that presentation, it shows that the wagering tax has gone, that in fiscal year 13, it went from 685.6 million to 595.6 million. And then, of course, the 15 report is just a partial report, I assume. And then the admission tax is also down. And one of the things for the legislators on the panel that we may need to deal with at some point in time is that a number of years back, when we changed the admissions tax structure, we guaranteed certain counties a certain amount of money. And actually, what has happened because of our decline now in tax revenues, the state is carrying the whole cost of the decline, and the locals are not participating in the reduction. And that's a pretty sensitive subject because in some cases, they've made commitments and maybe even borrowed money using those payments against that. But I do think that as part of the budget process, it's appropriate to examine this issue and to think about that. So let's make a note of that too, David, that somehow we're going to have to come up with an answer, even if we do nothing. I think we need to consider it. Can you explain why we don't have as much tax revenue as we used to? Okay, we'll let you off the hook on that one. Yes, Chairman Brown.
And thank you for coming and pinch hitting. I know sometimes that's difficult. I understand sometimes being thrown into the fire, what it's like, as I was a couple of years ago. I appreciate the information.
Yes.
I think one of the things, we did cap state reimbursement to the locals at $48 million.
We did put a cap on it, you're correct.
So they're starting to a little bit, but then that brings back, we authorized in law for some reports of local agreements to start being on the transparency portal. Do you know, is that starting to happen, or did that happen? Or I haven't looked to see if they're there. Are they there?
Yes, we started collecting the reports 2 years ago. We're tracking about $110 million a year in additional funding to locals based on those private, or the agreements between the locals. This is not tax revenue. We've been providing those on our website. We are now in the process of rolling out a new place on the portal where the information will be available. And actually, Eric Buss has helped us extensively with getting online. We followed the model DLGF created in sharing their information. I think it'll be a really good tool because individuals will be able to access the portal and determine, for example, at a foundation, how much is going toward administrative costs, how much is going toward, things for economic development for the community.
So right now that's on your part of the website and not on the portal part?
On the Gaming Commission website. The portal should be up and running, though, within the next 6 to 8 weeks.
Okay, great. Do you have oversight of any of those local agreements? I know they are historically, when the law was first put into place, but have we given you any oversight or regulation of local agreements over time?
We have the authority to disapprove agreements.
Disapprove.
Disapprove agreements if we see a problem.
Okay, and have you ever done that? Is that?
There was an issue with the community with East Chicago, and extensive litigation followed. But in that case, it was disapproved. They reformed, and in the end, the Attorney General signed off on the reformed, established foundation, and they comply at this point with all of the requirements.
Going forward, do we see any changes to any local agreements over this next biennial budget? If we did nothing to change the law with local agreements, do you see that there'll be any amending or changing to any local agreements?
We have heard that Lawrenceburg is interested in discussing their local agreement, perhaps amending it. We have no details of it.
So if they amended, do you also have the right of disapproval?
Yes.
Okay. Do you see, as we have discussed, the competitive pressures of gaming, and that's, we all understand the competitive pressures have put a lot of problems into this revenue stream. Tax credits that we have directed at the gaming industry, have the entities come to you and talked about different tax credits that are important or not important for their industry?
Not specifically. I think that as regulators, we try to steer clear of providing opinions, even to those we regulate, about issues before the General Assembly as policy decisions. We do know that we're probably, though, looking at a new normal. I mean, I'm not sure how much tax credits could really impact competition. I mean, what we found and what the operators have found is that in any circumstance, it's very difficult to get customers to drive past a casino to another one in another state. So we don't really have a lot of input from the casinos on what specifically they would like to see and what specifically would assist them. We are charged with conducting a study of the free play impact. That's due next November. We've contracted with Dr. Charlene Sullivan at Purdue. She's been our analyst since gaming.
So, a year from now?
Yes.
Okay.
And we'll be able to look at that and try
We
to
shouldn't
assess
change
the
it.
impact. But so far, I mean, all the casinos are taking the free play. And we are seeing a little bit of leveling off in revenue. But really, that's the extent of our
A
knowledge.
little bit of leveling off in revenue in what sense?
Last month was the first indication we received. We were down about 7%, which is the best we've seen in many months. And we're hoping that, you know, when the competition began in Cincinnati and in the rest of Ohio, we were a mature market.
Right.
In a mature market, you're not creating new patrons necessarily. You're fighting over the ones that have already existed. And what we're also seeing as additional casinos open in Ohio, they're cannibalizing each other. You know, they're not necessarily taking new patrons from us.
Right.
So we think that we might start to see more of a, you know, a stable gaming environment beginning this month, but.
Do you, do the units, the different casinos, do they have any statutory or otherwise any obligations to inform you about their intention to continue operating or maybe not I mean, across the country, we see, well, they're closing casinos here and there. And do we have a mechanism that they are required to give you a notice, or do they just go file a notice in bankruptcy court or close the doors? Do we have any way of receiving any notice about their plans on that stuff?
The commission is charged with approval and review of financing, which we do routinely. Many times, a discussion about a casino in peril revolves around a new financing request.
Okay. So you actually monitor their financing request, and you're able to engage in conversations with them about, well, does this mean that if something doesn't happen, that you're going to be in bigger trouble?
Yes.
Okay.
And we also have financial investigators who review all of their SEC filings
Okay.
and give us an analysis of what we should expect from each casino. To date, we've not been in danger of having a casino close its doors. And bankruptcies traditionally have, in the end, the casino's in a better position to market itself and to operate. But yes, you're correct. I mean, especially in a place like New Jersey where you see half the casinos
Right.
closing, it's something that we're vigilant about.
And I think back to the tax credits, you know, I'm a little cautious because of Chairman Dermody's and his summer study committee and the recommendation of proposals, especially coming out on the footprint, that some of the building tax credits or you know, infrastructure tax credits may want to be revived, but they as an industry haven't come to you to talk about that, have they?
Well, I think they like to keep us apprised of what they intend to ask for. We don't have a position on it. I think that one reason they're looking at the building tax credits is, you know, to this day, Horseshoe Hammond still doesn't have a hotel. You know, Shelbyville and Anderson don't have hotels, and we know that bringing in a hotel with the convention business is a way to grow the market. And so I would assume that they're requesting those things because they're probably at a limit of what they can get with the facilities they have, given the new competition.
That's a good point, Dr. Brown, about the local agreement situation, and apparently we have some access now if we want to take a look at some of those. We haven't really had very good access in the past on that. I might note that we're joined by Representative Sheila Klinker, representing the House Democrat Caucus, and Senator Mishler, here as well. Good. Thank you. Yes, ma'am. Is that right? Well, she's done a good job this morning.
My new job isn't half as interesting as working for Representative Plinker, though. I'll tell you that.
Everybody in this room understands why that's so. Anything else? Other questions? Comments? Okay, thank you very much, both of you, for coming. Next, we have the tax court, and I see that Judge Wentworth is with us, and I think she's going to be the presenter, which we appreciate that greatly. And Judge Wentworth, as you approach the table there, the blue light needs to be on for you to be able to. On the mic, yes. We're webcasting this, and so that's the only way they'll be able to hear you.
Now,
It's on. Thank you. Thank you very much for coming this morning.
I appreciate very much being able to come. The invitation I will always take advantage of because it's an important thing to me to be able to come to you and talk about the many accomplishments of the tax court, something that I feel very passionate about. And since you invested some money in this tax court last biennial, I want to tell you what we did with that. We updated, as we said we were going to do, we updated our technology. Now we can do state-of-the-art federal tax research, which we could not do in the past. We also updated our hardware with the additional money given the last biennial so that we will be able to work with the Odyssey case management system that's being rolled out and eventually e-filing. We also used the additional money to update our security system in the chambers. We didn't really have one, and now we do, and I appreciate that. The other thing that we were going to do was purchase a traveling video system, but we returned that money plus to the state. We returned $36,000 approximately because, and that was about 20% of our fiscal year end 2014 budget. The reason was that the system that we had hoped to purchase was greatly more expensive than we had budgeted for. Moreover, our out of Marion County hearings substantially decreased, and that's where we were going to use it. And lastly, the Court of Appeals did buy a system for their appeals on wheels, and we haven't used it yet, but we're hopeful that they will share with us when we don't have a conflict. So other things that we have accomplished in the last biennial budget time period is we've done the first major overhaul of the tax court rules that's been done since its inception in 1986. We also we are going to be sort of the guinea pig for the appellate courts in the rollout of Odyssey case management system. We go live with that December 1st, and the rest of the appellate courts will follow if no glitches occur in January 1st. Because we are a small court, small appellate court, the thinking was that any kind of glitch will show up quite brilliantly, and we might be able to forestall any major problems in the much more active courts of the Supreme Court and the Court of Appeals. We've done a lot of educational outreach, participating in with all the other appellate judges in various programs to bring civics education to not only students, but public school and high school, junior high, elementary age students, but also to young lawyers, law students, I've spoken and given continuing education programs all around the state at various bar associations, from Evansville to Fort Wayne to South Bend, Bloomington just recently. Also, with the leadership of the Supreme Court, there's going to be a task force that I will be on, that we will look at the procedures and the structure of the tax court to make sure we're getting the most effective and efficient management of the court. One of the things that came up in the overhaul of the tax court rules was the small claims rule that we have, which has no legs whatsoever. First of all, the monetary levels are so low that very few things can come in as a small claim. Plus, there's no incentive to use a small claims court procedure because there's no benefit, no additional benefit. I still have to go through all the same, they have the same discovery, the same requirement that a written opinion be given. So we want to look at that because that was, back in 1986, that was the charge of the court, to look at that and make it effective. And it really has never been. So we need to look at that. That's one of the things we're going to look at with the Supreme Court's task force. Those are some of the accomplishments. There are many more. But I want to move on to a challenge that we have had in the past and that remains, and that's that we still have a backlog of cases. That backlog is measured from the time the court takes a case under advisement, not from when it's filed. I have no control about how many cases are filed or what happens until they are taken by me under advisement. From that point on, there's a backlog of just somewhere in the high 30s cases that have not been decided yet.
How old are those cases?
There's one, the oldest one's over a year old.
Okay.
Hopefully that will be taken care of very promptly soon. Nonetheless, sometimes it'll get much lower and then it'll get higher depending on the solution that I think we need to address, and that is, well, and I want to find, not only do I want to get rid of the backlog, but we need to find a permanent solution to have more prompt decisions from the tax court. It's very important that the tax court, in its special role as creating a body of law in this very important area, that is done in a very timely manner. The solution, in my mind, is that we need additional legal assistance. And I'll tell you why that is. The law clerks are the drivers of output for the appellate courts. They're the drivers of it. It's analogous to a business profit center, or analogous to a partner, the partners in a law firm being top-heavy, or analogous to a business that has many vice presidents and not very many workers, to try to put it in terms you might more readily understand. The amount of work produced by an appellate court is directly related to the number of law clerks drafting opinions. Adding judges would do nothing but strain that process because judges are great at taking care of the input. We manage the case before it comes. We help with discovery problems. We do some management until the hearing is held and it becomes something under advisement. After that, then we have to have the drafting by the clerks so that they can put in writing what the judges have decided. So adding judges just strains the output and doesn't do anything to help output. Also, by adding more legal help, it gives us a closer parity with the other appellate courts. We're a small court, so everything you see with us is very visible. There's only one judge. There's a senior judge, but a senior judge works 30 days a year. And And some of that time, he doesn't work for me, he works for other courts around the state. The other appellate, the Court of Appeals has senior judges, and they have dedicated staff attorneys that work for them only. We're a small court. I have a staff attorney. I have, right now, luckily, 2 clerks. One's brand new, so it'll be a while before the learning curve hits with him. Nonetheless, all the other Court of Appeals judges have 3 clerks. They have not a dedicated staff attorney for each court, but they have a cadre of staff attorneys that support them, that do all their motions. They support the senior judges so that they don't dilute the clerks that work for the Court of Appeal judges themselves. The Supreme Court has, of course, many, they have a infrastructure that's quite significant. Certainly we would never need that. But my budget request, the additional monies I've requested are not much in the scheme of the other 2 courts, but are extremely important to the court taking care of its backlog and having a permanent solution to getting things out more quickly. I've asked for another law clerk and the ability to hire an intern as well. So I think that's, I know I'm standing between you and lunch, but I would entertain any questions that you might have for me.
Well, thank you for coming personally, and thank you for accepting the position of the judge of our tax court. It's kind of a unique experience here in Indiana, and of course Judge Fisher was a fine judge, and we've had a very good luck with this being a problem-solving institution that contributes to our court system, and you're carrying on that tradition in the same way. Are there questions from, yes, Chairman Brown?
Thank you, and thank you, Judge Wentworth, for coming. I know important information. You talked about the small claims issue. Do you have specific legislative changes that you'd be able to give us that?
Well, I think that I would like to get a task force together because I have my own opinions, but I'm one person, and I want to have the Supreme Court to weigh in because they also are in the mix of tax decisions. Judge Fisher, I think, would be invaluable input, and then we'd like some input from the tax section of the Bar Association and maybe some other input, but we haven't really gotten the mix of who would be on that task force yet, but we are seriously going to look at that small claims option and see if that might help our efficiency.
So you're probably anticipating it wouldn't be ready this legislative session, it'd be next, I mean, if
No, in fact, we think we could do it by rule because right now I do have a rule that sets up our small claim ability, but it's like 2 sentences, and it has a $5,000 or under limit for Department of Revenue, which is just
nothing.
It's not going to come to my court usually.
Bringing up Department of Revenue, they've talked about a policy change that once a case is filed with you, it's the Attorney General that has to sign off, and whether a person designated by the Department of Revenue would be more appropriate to necessarily sign off and settle cases. Do you have any opinion on that?
I am not really a policy wonk, but I do think, in fact, this morning before coming here, I had an attorney conference, and the case that we were discussing, they had to file in the tax court to give them more time to settle. And that means that now if the amount in controversy is enough, and I think it is, that they would have to get the Attorney General to sign off as well as the governor. And I think there's an appropriate, it's appropriate for the governor to sign off on over a certain dollar amount, but I don't know if the Department of Revenue, who is the client of the Attorney General, I don't know why the Department of Revenue wouldn't be able to have that authority in conjunction with its attorney. in consultation, because that's the
They're
way
asking
usual.
for sole authority.
To not delay the process as it goes through the Attorney
Yes.
General.
I think there's
But
also.
they are asking for sole authority, and so that's where I think the judge's suggestion may offer a way that, there may be a path that we can find here that might be helpful. That's a good point to bring this up at this point in time.
And then just kind of lastly, I understand and I hear about the clerk issue and getting motions, opinions out and your opinions transmitted in a timely fashion. Is there any way with the appellate division to share clerks on some of the simplistic matters or routine matters? Is that not appropriate? Wouldn't a clerk want to have a broad range of experience in maybe appellate divisions and not specifically limited?
Well, first of all, we couldn't use Supreme Court clerks because then they'd have to not be on any kind
Right, I
of
would,
appeal.
at the appellate level.
So
could
it
we-
would have to be Court of Appeals clerks. When I was a clerk 25 years ago, I was loaned out.
Just yesterday.
I was loaned out by Judge Fisher to a Court of Appeals clerk to do one case, and I did so. But that was a kind of a gentleman's agreement or between the two judges. The Court of Appeals judges have a big caseload. They have a lot of stuff. They may not have the ability to share with me, and sometimes courts like to have their autonomy. And you see that I'm trying to be judicious about answering this question.
I understand.
It's difficult to do so. Plus,
I deal with a group of professionals that like to think that they're involved in their own little world.
Yes, doctor, I know. Nonetheless, or in addition, rather, tax, we can teach tax law to people, but there's a longer learning curve sometimes because you're not a tax person, so you don't get what I get. You go to a party, and they know you're a doctor, and they start telling you the symptoms they have. Mm-hmm. I go to a party, they ask me what I do, and I say I'm a tax attorney, and they say, oh, thank God you do that. I can't do that. There's an attitude that I am trying to dispel by education around the state, even with attorneys, that don't think that they think you have to be a mathematician to be a tax lawyer, which is not in the least bit true. But there's a natural wariness by many clerks who haven't had an experience with tax not to think it's too difficult to do. Right now I have a new clerk just hired who spent as an intern with then Chief Judge Robb. And so he had some experience there. But it was he still has that learning curve in our court because it's very different. After all, we're the only court in the state and one of the very few in the nation that is an appellate level court.
Right.
We are an appellate court that hears things on the record, appellate hearings, just like the Court of Appeals does. On the other hand, we are like a trial court as well. And we do everything that our wonderful cadre of trial courts does. But we're not really a trial court because we don't have intermediate review. We must write everything down. I cannot rule from the bench. I can rule on an objection, but I can't make a ruling from the bench. Now, maybe we can once we look at the small claims. But right now, I am very different than a appellate court in some ways, which makes us a very different court and doesn't translate exactly. It could maybe temporarily help get one or two, but we need a permanent solution. Even before I became judge, there was a backlog, and it was due to the clerks there was one clerk and one staff attorney for some time. But also, as a practitioner, we always wished that the tax court cases would come out more quickly. And I think that there might be a permanent solution that we could come to, as well as getting rid of our backlog. And if it seems like we're getting them out too fast, we can always remedy that situation, right?
Thank you.
Other questions, comments? Yeah, Representative Clinker.
Chairman, is our senior judge, Tom Fisher, still hearing cases throughout the state?
He is. And he has been a great mentor to me throughout my career, not only as now judge. And he is contributing.
Do you go together, or does he
No.
hear a case and you hear a case somewhere?
We are separate.
And you go out into that area?
We
Or
do
do
if
you
we're
hear it here?
asked. There are two ways we travel. One is when someone files a petition and they want to have it heard in one of the 7 statutory places I can go, they elect to have their hearing in that place. The other way we can do it is sometimes we ask the litigants whether they would mind doing it at a law school or we did it at Franklin College once. We tried to, there's only one tax court and it serves the entire state. So it's one of my missions to try to, that's why we have video streaming of our hearings now, so that we can be more accessible throughout the state to every taxpayer.
Are you traveling each week to a different area?
We have not traveled as much in 2014, our traveling has been much less than last year, than 2013. There was a lot of travel in that year. I don't know why that is.
Is that more cases?
No, it really has no relationship to that. We are having more cases being worked on. They're working on settlement. They file in the tax court, and then they ask for time to work on settlement, and I'm liberal about that as long as they can convince me there's an actual chance they will settle it. Sometimes they're having a supplemental audit done on a different year that they want to combine. There are various reasons, but it's the litigants that drive that, because I set hearings whenever things are fully briefed and ready to go. I set the hearing in a timely manner after that occurrence. So I think that we lag behind the rest, and I think the rest were having a lower amount of cases last year, and we didn't hit until this year. But each year is different, and how many cases are filed and how many come to hearing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm glad that you're proposing a solution to your backlog here, and we'll take a look at this. I didn't think of it in these terms about the output and the law clerk being a pivotal part of that, but I follow what you're telling me here. I wonder if we think going toward the future on the small claims side of the thing, I guess one, just thoughts for you to take back and look at with the Chief Justice and others would be, in terms of recommendations, would be whether or not the small claims amount should be higher here. And then secondly, because we could do that for the tax court and it'd just be a unique situation. And then secondly, I wonder if we ought to think about whether or not we should have a magistrate down the road, not in this budget request, as part of the thought process here. I was going to ask you to bring in your annual physical report because you're the only tax court judge we have. And we're kind of we're in a very unique position here in Indiana. As you point out, we're one of the few states that has this, and it's really worked very well at a very, what I would consider to be moderate to modest cost to the public. And so I think that's all part of the process that we need to do. And so I appreciate your request, and I'm glad for you. I appreciate your explanation as to why it may help you solve the problem to some extent. The other thing I wanted to touch on in your letter was item 1 on the second page where it says current services. think what I'm seeing here represents a fact that when we did the pay increase recommendation or budget item a couple of years ago of $89 million overall, that was for everybody. And I think that the executive branch, and Brian, you're going to need to help me understand this, just held back all the money from everybody, including other branches of government, which I wasn't quite sure whether you had the legal authority to do that or not. But
That's not the case, but I can
okay,
jump in.
so help me understand the request here on item 1, where we talk about kind of that item.
In terms of the tax court's request?
Well, we can do it in terms of that, and then since we've raised the issue generally, maybe we need to get a clarification on that too. That's what I'm trying to figure out.
For fiscal 14, we spoke with then Chief Justice Dixon about how the judicial branch, including the judicial officers and the prosecutors, would sort of match what the executive branch did
Okay.
with pay raises for executive branch employees. This also included judicial branch employees. So after looking at the performance bonuses that the executive branch awarded to executive branch employees, the judicial branch thought a corresponding increase would be a one-time stipend for judicial branch officers that was not base building, and that equated to about 2% of the judicial officers or the prosecuting attorney's salary. So they got a one-time 2% stipend, and then the judicial branch employees themselves got a 2% base building salary increase.
And the reason it's asked for is that it was paid out of our budget, but it wasn't budgeted for that in that year. So we have to make up for that to
So
do our.
is there a problem of going back and filling a gap with our budget going forward, Brian? I'm not quite following that.
I think that's just something that we'll have to look at in
Okay.
terms of
Okay.
whether the agency, in this case, the tax court, was able to absorb that increase, or whether additional funds are needed going forward.
And that applied, you spoke to the Chief Justice on that for the judicial branch.
Yes.
Was that also, did you work out some kind of arrangement with the other statewide office holders? Are we going to see similar types of discussions with, for example, Secretary of State and the Treasurer and the Auditor?
There weren't discussions with the separately elected officials. If they had wanted to broach the subject, I mean, we obviously would have sat down with them and discussed it with them, but Chief Justice Dixon certainly did reach out and wanted to talk to discuss it.
So the
And he
others
did.
that didn't discuss it with you, the $89 million was designed to cover everybody, I think. Wasn't that, am I not correct when I say that?
There is that biennial appropriation in the budget bill for personal services contingency.
And that was for everybody.
That's correct.
So I guess one of the questions that maybe as a construction of a budget process, if we think that we're worried about that sort of separation of powers of different offices, whether we should just do it the way we have in the past, or whether we should fractionalize that out somehow based on these submissions. So that's just something that we need to think about going forward, and you might have some suggestions for us too.
And as I said, we turned money back in, but that was money from our operating budget,
Yes.
not from our salaries, and we
Okay.
aren't able to mix the two. We could have covered it from the operating,
Okay.
but the salaries are driven by so many other
Right.
factors.
Other questions or comments? Judge, thank you very much for coming today and making this presentation. Oh, yes, okay, we're doing pretty well on the scheduling. So we'll be back at 1 o'clock, and then we'll take DCS, and we've tried to schedule this through these 4 weeks that we're going to be doing this so that we don't have just a full 8-hour day in here, so that people have a chance to keep their business going on other matters. So we'll see you all back here at 1 o'clock.